Samuel chapter 2 and verse 9. Reading one of the lines from Hannah's song. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. I'd like to read it again. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness, for by strength shall no man prevail. You know, they say that in the Song of Hannah, you find reflected almost all the themes that we encounter in the books of Samuel. And I want to think a little bit about a passage today that this verse seems very relevant to. And it's especially the first and last lines of that verse that I just want to focus on. He keeps the feet of his saints. By strength, that is, by human strength, shall no man prevail. Yesterday we looked at the life of Mephibosheth, and we thought about taking our seat at the table of grace. Coming to really appreciate in our hearts what it is that God has done for us in his grace. Well, today I want to take a look at the life of his father, Jonathan, and I want to think about taking up your sword in the conflict of faith. Taking up your sword in the conflict of faith. It's wonderful to come to the table of grace, to appreciate in our hearts and rest truly in all that Christ has done for us, and learn to receive that grace in our hearts, to appreciate that grace in our hearts, and to show that same kind of grace to one another. But God has shown us that grace so that then we can go forth from there and serve him. And I want to think a little bit about how we can do that like Jonathan, by faith. We're going to start out by reading a little bit in the very area where our brother David was reading with us. And we're going to read a little bit about God's intention for the kingship of Israel and how Saul fell short of these things. Let's turn over to chapter 9. 1 Samuel chapter 9. So, as our brother's been bringing before us, the nation rejected God as their king. They wanted a human king who would be like the nations. We're going to read the words of the Lord. He tells Samuel that he's about to meet the man who is going to be the first king. 1 Samuel chapter 9 and verse 15. Now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear a day before Saul came, saying, Tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel. Now watch this next phrase. That he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines. For I have looked upon my people, because their cry is come unto me. When Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, Behold the man whom I spake to thee of, this same shall reign over my people. So God told Samuel that he was going to the next day meet the man that God had chosen in answer to the people's desire to be their first king. And God said that this man it was God's intention, it was God's desire that he would not only be captain over Israel, but that he would deliver the nation from the hand of the Philistines. Now you know the story. Saul just thought that he was out with his servant looking for some lost donkeys, and they were just going to Samuel to get some help in finding the donkeys. But of course, God had greater purposes in it. Let's go over to chapter 10 and verse 1. So Samuel has a private audience with Saul. Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, Is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? And now Samuel gives to Saul 3 signs that are going to assure him of this prophecy, that God is calling Saul to this important role of being captain over his people and of defending them and delivering them from the Philistines. I just want to note the third of these signs, verse 5. After that thou shalt come to the hill of God. Your Bible translation may say the Gibeah of God. You may know that Gibeah was Saul's hometown, so perhaps this refers to a hill near near Saul's hometown. After that thou shalt come to the Gibeah of God, where is the garrison of the Philistines. And it shall come to pass, when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place, with a psaltery and a tabret and a pipe and a harp before them. And they shall prophesy, and the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and shalt be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as the occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. So Saul is going to receive these signs. They're going to assure him of the calling that Samuel has put upon his life. And the third one of them is going to be very significant. It's going to come close to Saul's hometown. It's going to come in the same place where there's a garrison of the Philistines. This enemy that has been oppressing and persecuting the people of God. And he tells them that he's going to meet a company of prophets. And when that happens, he is going to receive the Spirit of the Lord. The power of God is going to come upon him. And he is going to be turned into another man. And Samuel says, when it happens, when these signs are come unto thee, make sure that you do as the occasion demands, for God is with thee. And it seems evident what it is that the occasion demands. He would now go and deal with this garrison of the Philistines. He would begin to take these steps in being a deliverer to his people. Well, let's read on. Verse 9, and it was so that when he had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all those signs came to pass that day. And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him. And the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. Verse 13, and when he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place. And Saul's uncle said unto him and to his servant, whither went ye? And he said, to seek the asses. And when we saw that they were nowhere, we came to Samuel. And Saul's uncle said, tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto you. Saul said unto his uncle, he told us plainly that the asses were found, but of the matter of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. So Saul receives these promised signs. And I think I neglected to read a verse there. After Samuel told him that he should do what the occasion demands, then in verse 8, Samuel had told him once he had done that he was to go down to Gilgal and wait there for a week, and Samuel would meet him there. So Saul comes, he receives these signs. He comes to the hill, the Spirit of God comes on him. There's the evidence of divine power upon his life. He is made into another man, as Samuel put it. And when he's done, what does he do? Makes an end of prophesying, goes to the high place, goes and speaks to his uncle. Doesn't go to Gilgal because he hasn't obeyed what he was told to do. Doesn't go there to meet with Samuel. He goes to his uncle. His uncle asks him about the conversation with Samuel. And he says that Samuel helped him out with the donkeys, but of the matter of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. You know what follows on from this in the end of chapter 10? Samuel gathers around the people from Mizpah to introduce to them their new king. They can't find him anywhere. He's hiding. He doesn't want to be king. He seemingly doesn't want to take up the task. And we can understand why. The Philistines were an intimidating enemy. They were an enemy that was not only much larger in terms of their army, an army like the sands of the sea. At times we read that sort of language about them. But they were a seafaring people. And from that trade, they had better weapons than the people of Israel had. And they were dominating the people of Israel, and the people of Israel were suffering under them. We read some about that in previous chapters of 1 Samuel and afterwards. And so Saul does not take up the task. He does not go and deal with the situation in Gibeah. He even seems somewhat reluctant to be crowned as king. And so what happens as a result? Chapter 13. Chapter 13 and verse 5, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people as sandwiches on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash eastward from Beth Haven. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, The people were distressed. Then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in high places, and in pits. Some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. And as for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him, trembling. This takes place sometime after the events that we've just read about, and we see that the Philistines have increased their oppression of the people of God. Some of the people are hiding in caves and thickets and in pits. Others of them have gone to hide in faraway places of the land. We read a little bit later on that some of them had actually left the side of Israel and had somehow gone over to the Philistines and were trying to become a part of their camp. Others, in chapter 14, we read, had fled into the mountains of Ephraim. And what about that group of Philistines? What about that garrison that was at Gibeah? What has happened with it? Has it ever been dealt with? Let's go to verse 15. Samuel arose and gat him up from Gilgal and to Gibeah of Benjamin. Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. This is something we'll read a lot about Saul. He's counting his people, and counting his army isn't very encouraging to him. Usually after he counts his army, he doesn't do anything because he has so much less than the enemy. Verse 16, Saul and Jonathan, his son, the people who were with them, abode in Gibeah of Benjamin. But the Philistines encamped in Michmash. And the spoilers, so there's raiding parties from the Philistines going out in all different directions. The spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. One company turned into the way that leads to Ophrah, and to the land of Shual. Another company turned to the way of Beth-horon. Another company turned to the way of the border that looketh toward the valley of Zeboim, toward the wilderness. And so this garrison that was never dealt with, now they're going out in all directions across the land, and they're wreaking havoc among the people of Israel. Not only that, but look at what's happened in verse 19. Now, there was no smith, you might say today there's no blacksmith found throughout all the land of Israel. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. So they don't have any weapons, except verse 22. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any of the people that were with Saul and Jonathan. But with Saul and with Jonathan his son was their famine. So all the people of Israel, for weapons they only have wooden sticks and clubs and farm implements. There are only 2 swords in the hands of Saul and Jonathan. Verse 23, and the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash. Now it came to pass upon a day that Jonathan the son of Saul said unto the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over to the Philistine garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, under a pomegranate tree which is in Migron. The people that were with him were about 600 men. And Ahiah the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. This priest was with Saul. And the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on the one side, and a sharp rock on the other side. The name of one was Bozez, and the name of the other was Seneh. Verse 6, and Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, Come, and let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. And his armor bearer said unto him, Do all that is in thine heart. Turn thee. Behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. Then said Jonathan, Behold, we will pass over unto these men, and we will uncover ourselves to them. And if they say thus unto us, Tarry until we come to you, then we'll stand still in our place, and will not go up unto them. But if they say thus, Come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord hath delivered them into our hand. And this shall be a sign unto us. And both of them discovered themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, Behold, the Hebrews have come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, Come up to us, and we will show you a thing. Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, Come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor-bearer after him. And they fell before Jonathan, and his armor-bearers slew after him. Verse 23, so the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Bethaven. I trust that the Lord will bless to us this extended reading from his word. And there's so much more that even could be read about this particular battle, but for the sake of time, we leave it there. Jonathan took up his sword by faith. It's the first thing that I would like to think about together today. He took up his sword by faith. He was one of only two people in the nation of Israel who had a sword, himself and his father. It was so little in light of the great army, with all of its weaponry, it was arrayed against his people. It must have felt like so little. There were the Philistines with their thousands of chariots and their thousands of horsemen and an army like the sands of the sea, all of them well armed with iron weapons. And there were the Israelites with two metal weapons between them. And everyone else only perhaps with stones and slings and bows and arrows and maybe some farming tools. What good was that? 600 men poorly armed, a couple of metal weapons against such a mighty army. How could they ever be free? How could God ever set them free with that? And yet we read in verse 1, it came to pass upon a day. One day, Jonathan decided to do something about it. And what led up to this day, we don't know. But maybe Jonathan had been thinking about the way that God had delivered them before in the past. Maybe he thought back to chapter 7, where Samuel had gathered together the people before Saul was king. He had gathered them together for a prayer meeting. And the Philistines noticed it, and they thought this was a perfect time to take advantage of it and to attack them. And the Philistine army came over the horizon, and the people cried out in terror. And what did Samuel do? They weren't prepared for battle. They didn't have weapons there. What did they have? Samuel took a lamb, and he offered up a lamb. And the Lord thundered and discomfited the Philistines and won a great victory. And maybe Jonathan was thinking about that, and he thought, I only have a sword. But they didn't even have a sword, they just had a lamb. And God was able to deliver them that day. Or maybe he thought further back into Israel's history, all the way back to Judges 3. And he thought about the days of Shamgar. That was a time also where the Philistines were oppressing the nation of Israel, and they were under a very severe bondage. And what did Shamgar have? He didn't have a sword. He just had an ox goad, one of those wooden farm tools. And with it, he defeated 600 Philistines. That many men were slain by one man, one wooden ox goad, and the power of God. And suddenly Jonathan's sword didn't seem so insufficient. Why couldn't God use this? Why couldn't God use me? And now his solitary sword was no longer a sign of his own inability, but it was a sign of his great responsibility. Who had given him this sword? God had given him this sword. And why had God given him this sword? God had given him this sword to defend his people. And Jonathan determined to use what God had given him for the glory of God and the freedom of his people. But there were two swords in Israel. And where was the other sword? We read about it in verse 2 indirectly. It was resting beside Saul under a pomegranate tree in the uttermost part of Gibeah, far away from the place of conflict. We've been hearing already today, God's people were in bondage, and Saul was uniquely equipped to deliver them. He was taller than most of the rest of the men in the nation, and who had given him that height? God had. And he had 600 men at his disposal. Who had given him those men? God had put them under his care. And he had a sword to use. Who had given him that sword? God had given him that sword. He was gifted with special abilities, with special resources in order that he might deliver God's people. That was what Samuel had said. And he was called by God to this very position, to this very role, and to fight for them. But he couldn't bother, or maybe he was just afraid to get up from under the pomegranate tree. It's not the first time, sadly, that we see him in this condition. But one day, Jonathan decided to act, and to start first, when he took up his sword of faith. My brother and sister, where is your sword today? Where is the gift that God has given you to use on behalf of his people? Maybe you're in a small assembly. Maybe your gift, like Jonathan's, is a unique gift. Maybe there's only one or two of you in your assembly who have the gift that God has given you to use on behalf of his people. Are you taking it up to serve God's people? Or is it resting underneath the pomegranate tree? Will God's people suffer the loss of its disuse? And maybe it's not only your sword, maybe it's also the other brother or sister who has the same gift. Maybe both of them are lying idle. And maybe it's just out of discouragement. These are difficult days. This seems like so little. It seems like so fruitless. It seems like God could hardly use me. I feel so incapable. I feel so unable. But who was it who gave that gift to you? And there's not a brother or sister here today who does not have a gift that God has given you to use on behalf of his people, who has not put you where you are. Jonathan took up his sword by faith. But secondly, I want to notice in verse 6, Jonathan counted on God. Jonathan took up his sword by faith. Jonathan counted on God. Saul did a lot of counting. You saw that there. He counted the people in chapter 13 and verse 15 while the raiding parties were going throughout the land. We read a little bit further back. He was counting the people, and the people were leaving him. And because he was afraid that soon he was going to have too few people, he disobeyed God in a very awful way. We'll see in chapter 14, in the middle of the battle, we didn't read it, but in the middle of the battle, he stops to count his people to find out who might be missing and who might have gone up to the Philistines to attack them. And so Saul is idly sitting under the pomegranate tree. He's counted his people. He's counted, if you can count the countless army of the Philistines. That's so discouraging. Jonathan has been counting as well. But he only counts up to one. He counts on God. He counts on God. Jonathan had great confidence in God. Look at what he said in verse 6. He said, "There is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few." So long as we have this one on our side, that's all we need to go and to accomplish something for his glory. Jonathan was humble, but he had great expectations of God. He did not presuppose to say what God must do, but he knew what God could do, and he knew that God could do it either with many or with few. Jonathan saw God's actions and not theirs as ultimately determining the outcome of the conflict. This really had nothing to do with their own ability or the weapons that were at their disposal. The question was, is God on their side? And Jonathan knew that if God was on their side, then they could be victorious for the sake of his name. See the phrase I'm looking for. Middle of verse 6, sometimes it's right in front of your eyes. "Come and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few." So he knew that the Lord could do it, and the question would be, would the Lord do it? But if the Lord would do it, if the Lord was on their side, if the Lord was leading them forward, then he knew that they could not help but be successful. And so, my brothers and sisters, are we counting on God and pressing forward in faith, seeking to accomplish what it is that he has for us? When we look at faith in Scripture, it's an active thing. It's not something that leads us sitting and just waiting. It's something that would have us be active, either active in prayer or active in obedience. It's not just waiting around for something to happen. It's actively coming before God and seeking His mind. It's attempting to do things for God that we know are in keeping with His revealed will. We see this in the book of Hebrews 11. It's not a list of people who just believed things. It's about people who by faith did things. By faith, Noah built an ark. By faith, Abraham obeyed. By faith, Moses chose. Over and over again, people who had faith, who believed on God, and when they knew what His mind was, they counted on God and stepped forward. But how? How would Jonathan know if this was of God? I want to see number 3. He sought fellowship with a like-minded brother. He sought fellowship with a like-minded brother. Verse 6, he said to his armor-bearer, "Come and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us." It's interesting who he didn't tell. He didn't tell his father. And we're explicitly told that in verse 1. Jonathan, the son of Saul, said unto the young man that bare his armor, "Come and let us go over to the Philistines' garrison. It is on the other side." But he told not his father. Why didn't he tell his father? He didn't tell his father because Saul was not a man of faith. And Saul might have tried to dissuade him, might have told him how impossible it was, how the numbers didn't match up, how there was no way that they could get successfully up that sharp and thorny place to the top. Saul might have tried to dissuade him from it. Or even worse, Saul might have tried to take the glory for himself. And we see that elsewhere in these sections. We see that back in chapter 13. Jonathan goes out and he defeats a garrison of the Philistines, and Saul has them announce that he has been victorious over the Philistines. We see this a little later on in chapter 14 if we would have read it. Once Jonathan and his armor-bearer go forward and God honors their faith and they're beginning to win the victory, Saul takes his men to go and to join in the battle, and he tells them that this battle is about avenging him and his enemies. Jonathan wasn't doing this for the glory of men, so he didn't tell his father. He didn't tell the people. He wasn't looking for tag-alongs. Who did he tell? He told his armor-bearer. As an officer in the army, Jonathan had a young man who helped him, maybe carried his armor at times when they weren't actively engaged in battle, and in battle fought alongside him. And Jonathan must have learned over time that this young man was a man of faith, a man who had confidence in God. And so he tells him what's on his heart. What does his armor-bearer say to him in verse 7? "Do all that is in thy heart. Turn thee. Behold, I am with thee, according to thy heart." My young brother and sister, God has given you a gift. Take it up in faith. Count on God. But then I encourage you to seek fellowship with a like-minded brother or sister of faith, particularly an older, godly brother and sister in faith. Bring before them the things that the Lord is setting on your heart. Talk to them about it. Ask them to pray together with you, and you will find much godly counsel in this. I would say to all, especially those who are older brothers and sisters, do you know another brother or sister who has a spiritual exercise to do something for God? Maybe they just need a little encouragement in it. Or maybe it's something that by the nature of it they can't do alone. They don't have the resources or ability to do it alone. Wouldn't it be a great encouragement to them if you would think about going alongside them and saying, "I am with you. Do all that is in thy heart." You see, none of us can do it alone. We need each other. That's why the Lord put us in assemblies. That's why the Lord designed, we were hearing about this last night, that there should be spiritual fathers and spiritual sons, spiritual mothers and spiritual daughters. God designed us to be together and to encourage one another. That's why gatherings like this conference are so wonderful. And we owe a great thanks to the believers here in Cooroy for uniting us together, that we might encourage one another. Go and do what's in your heart. The Lord be with you, and I am with you. He sought fellowship with a like-minded brother. But fourthly, Jonathan looked for confirmation of God's will, verses 8 to 12. It wasn't enough that Jonathan thought it was a good idea. It wasn't enough even that his friend thought it was a good idea. Jonathan wanted to know if this was of God. For that's what he said in verse 6. It may be that the Lord will work for us, and he knows that God will work for them if they are working according to God's will. But he wants to be certain if it's God's will. And so he decides to, as it were, put out a fleece like Gideon. He looks to God for direction before proceeding. Now, it's not that Jonathan was doubting God's ability to do it. That's not what Jonathan was doing. Jonathan wanted to be certain that it was God's will and that he was following God's will so that he could be confident of God acting on their behalf. He wanted to be certain that God was leading them forward in this. Now, if you were going to launch out on this attack, you knew that the enemy was a full garrison, well fortified, at the top of this hill. And the only way to get up there was up a very difficult pathway. What was your best hope for success? It would have to be the element of surprise. But Jonathan's confidence isn't in the element of surprise. He's not going to rely on a sneak attack to give them a better chance of success. Rather, he proposes that they let the Philistines know that they're about to attack so that they can be certain that this is God's will. He's taking what we would consider a greater risk of failure so that he might have full confidence that this is the will of God. And so he proposes this risky plan. He says, we'll go and we'll uncover ourselves to them. We'll make some noise. We'll maybe jump up so that they spot us. And if they say, wait there until we come to you, then we're going to stay here. It's not God's will for us to go up. But if they tell us, come up unto us, then we will go up, because that's a sign that God has delivered them into our hands. And so verse 11, that's what they do. They both reveal themselves to the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines, they are very dismissive of it. They know what an almost impossible task it is that these young men have ahead of them. Listen to the scorn with which they speak. Look at what they say in verse 11. Behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. The men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor-bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you a thing. We would say today, come here and we'll teach you a lesson. And indeed, in saying that, they did teach a lesson to Jonathan and his armor-bearer. Not the lesson that the Philistines thought they would teach. This is the lesson they taught. God is with us. God is with us. Jonathan says in verse 12, come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan could have his confidence in God because he had a relationship with God, a first-hand relationship with God. So different than Saul. Saul doesn't have a relationship with God. We read later in this chapter that when he builds an altar, it's the first time that he has built an altar. And so Jonathan has along a priest, and it's a priest from the disgraced family of Eli. It's actually a priest whose father was one of the men who had lost the ark earlier in the book of 1 Samuel. And so Saul, when he in a little bit catches on to what's happening, he asks the priest to tell him if he should go ahead. And so the priest, seemingly, he puts in his hand for the Urim and Thummim. And then Saul, he sees a bit more of what's going on. And it seems like the battle is definitely going in Israel's favor. And he tells the priest, take out your hand. I don't need to hear anymore. I don't need that direction anymore. It's obvious what we should do. We're going to go forward. Saul disregards God's will when he's sure that he knows what he wants. But Jonathan wasn't willing to pursue his own ideas, no matter how appealing they were. Jonathan acknowledges God's sovereignty, and he wants to be sure that it's God's will. He wants to step forward in faith. And so he looks to God for confirmation of his will. and he receives it. And so what do? They begin to make their way forward. Earlier in the chapter, in verses 4 to 5, we find out a little bit about this pathway. This is the fifth thing that I would like to bring before us. Jonathan persevered despite hardship. Just because something is God's will, just because we have brothers and sisters who have joined us in the task, and just because we are pursuing it by faith with a spirit of humble submission, it doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. And it wasn't easy for Jonathan and his armor bearer that day. The pathway up to the top of this hill was a difficult one. It says in verse 4, there was a sharp rock on one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And these rocks must have been very formidable because they've even been given names, Bozez and Senna. And Bozez means slippery, and Senna means thorny. So it's a sharp, slippery, and thorny path. And you could see in the Philistines' confidence how unlikely they think it is that these young men would be able to successfully make it up the top. In fact, it seems that after mocking the young Hebrews, they just go back to what they were doing because it seems like such a foolhardy thing that these young men would have to accomplish to come up and to do them any harm. And so it was God's will, and they had confirmation that God was leading them forward, but it was hard. We read in verse 13 that they had to go up upon their hands and their feet. The New King James Version says they climbed up on their hands and knees. Brother and sister, the path of faith and obedience is rarely easy. And often we can only climb it like Jonathan and his friend did, on our hands and on our knees. Don't give up. Keep on climbing. And so they climbed forward, seeking to work for God. God worked mightily on their behalf. We didn't read about this, but in verse 15, it says that there was a great trembling in the host and in the field and among all the people. The garrison and the spoilers, they also trembled. The earth quaked. It was a very great trembling. And so God shakes and confuses the whole company of the camp of the Philistines. And in the confusion and fear of it all, they begin to fight against one another and turn their swords against each other. Jonathan had said that perhaps God would work for them when they set off, and now God is working for them. And you remember Jonathan went up there with his one sword, but if this garrison was going to be defeated, surely it would take a lot more swords than that. And where would those swords come from? Jonathan left it in the hands of God. And the Lord knew where to get those swords from. He got the swords up in the Philistines' hands, and he used them against the enemy that was oppressing God's people. Jonathan started out with just one sword, and he left the rest to God. And God turned every man's sword against his fellow. How often it is that we don't step out because we can't see how the ultimate goal will be accomplished. We don't see how the little work that we're starting out here with this little bit of ability could ever achieve what we see that needs to be done. But you and I can do as Jonathan did. We can use the resource God has given us by faith. Look to God to provide the rest. And for the sake of time, pass over the sixth point. I leave it for you to look at. Jonathan inspired others to join the fight. Soon we see these people who were hiding, and the men who were back in the camp, and even the men who had gone over to the Philistine camp, they come and they join Jonathan. His boldness and faith, and God working through him, it encouraged other people to come and join him in the fight. You know, Saul had a very different approach. He made very strict rules for the people. And the rules that Saul put upon the people, they didn't help them in the fights. They actually made the men weary and less able to accomplish the task. And it even caused some of the people to fall into awful sin, to eat meat with the blood. But Jonathan's faith inspired the people to join him in the fight. So, you know, sometimes we get fretting about what our brothers and sisters are doing, and start to think about different ways we can get other people to join us. We could maybe persuade someone to do something, or press someone to do something. And do you know the Bible does endorse godly encouragement? Do you know the most encouraging thing to God's people is one man, one woman with faith in God, confident of his will, stepping forward in the light that he has and looking for God to work through them. Finally, verse 23, Jonathan glorified God by his faith. He glorified God by his faith. What was said in the end of it all? That Jonathan had done this? No, verse 23, the Lord saved Israel that day. Because everyone could see that there's no way Jonathan could have done it on his own. It could never have been accomplished except God was working together with them. So my brothers and sisters, I pray that this will be an encouragement to each one of us to use what God has given us. First, take up your sword in faith. Second, count on God, not on yourself, not primarily on others, count on God. 3, seek fellowship with like-minded brothers and sisters of faith. 4, look for confirmation that it is God's will. 5, persevere despite hardship, even if it means spending much time on your hands and knees. 6, seek to draw others along with you through the example of your faith. 7, above all, seek to glorify God. It is true what Hannah sang about. The Lord keeps the feet of his saints. By human strength shall no man prevail. But praise God, by his mighty strength and through his grace, you and I can accomplish great things for his glory. May that be the case.